Hi everyone. I bet you guys are all feeling a little bit tired. It's been a really long day, but we've had lots of great speakers, and I feel really lucky to be able to come to a session like this and be able to talk about customer and customer experience, because I think often it's the part of brand that we know needs to happen but tend to kind of feel like it's a little bit too complicated, so we do our best and just hope that things are going to work out. I've worked with brands that do all different kinds of things. Some of them have been government departments who work very hard at trying to deliver policy. Some of them have been skincare manufacturers. Others have been telecommunications brands. Some have been some of the best known mobile handset brands that went the way of the dodo because they failed to listen to their customers and truly understand what people want from products and failed to deliver a whole range of experiences that supported the sales process. You might remember them, BlackBerry. Does anyone, yeah, remember those guys? Yeah, it was an interesting time. And it was an interesting time because we got to see how an organisation's leadership was at odds with what was happening out there in the consumer space. There was an inherent belief that people wanted tools and not toys, and we all wanted toys at work. We wanted iPhones and we wanted to bring our own device. So it was a very interesting end to the original smartphone manufacturer. But what brings me here today is getting to talk to you guys about how brand and customer experience can come together and create really important relationships that don't just drive loyalty, but also drive wonderful organisations where employees can flourish, where communities can grow, and where real outcomes can actually take place. So joining me on stage today are some really impressive women. And I'd just like to say we're the only all-woman panel, which I think is really exciting. I think it's really exciting. I haven't sat on an all-chick panel for quite a while, so this is great. So thank you, Derek, for making it happen. But first to join me is Rebecca Hendry. Rebecca has an incredible background. She is a principal at Meld Studios, where she specialises in experience and service design. But prior to that, she was with Westpac, and she led the experience design function there. Rebecca's also been a journo. She's really smart. She's really clever. She's got a best bullshit detector. So if any of you want to come up with some really sharp questions, aim them at Rebecca rather than me.
Or don't.
And she likes to drink gin, so if you want to pick her brain after our session in the bar, gin's her drink. Joining us as well is Mari Kauppinen. Some of you may know Mari, and for those of you who don't know her already, you're going to wish you did. Mari is the Director of Marketing, Consumer Insight. Could you finish the whole long title for me, at IBM. She's a seasoned IBMer, 23 years of experience. But she's also a really, really clued in lady. When I asked Mari why she comes to things like this, she said, I want to stay connected with what's happening in the world. I want to be part of what's happening out there, and I want to be able to give back. So I think if there's any reason to sit on a panel, that's probably a really good one. Mari also likes French champagne. So again, if you want to pick her brains, that's where you need to go. And then finally, I have Kirsten Downey. Kirsten is the Chief Marketing Officer at the Australian Film, Television and Radio School. She's got a really, really interesting role because she has just been at the spearhead of transforming that entire organisation. And the place where they started was with brand. So that was around nailing a 5-year strategy, figuring out what brand was about, what vision was about, what purpose was about, and using that to imbue the story, to drive product innovation, to drive customer experience. So if you want a playbook on how to do it right from the very beginning and bring relevance back to an organisation that, in the wake of technological change, is going through quite a lot of an identity crisis, because what is TV, what's radio anymore in this new brand world? Kirsten is the lady to talk to about it, and Kirsten's a white wine drinker, so and I'm vodka, so it's going to definitely be punchy if you talk to all four of us. So I've noticed that today panels have been talking, and there's been throwing to questions from the floor. If you guys have like a burning question or want to know something, stick your hand up and let's get a mic to you. We'd like this session to be participatory and an option for people to throw comments. Barbs, leave the criticism to Twitter, but anything else onto stage with us so that we can actually have an informal chat that's of value.
I'll take nice questions now, and the hard ones over the bar. I know some of you in the audience. Simon, Rob, no questions. Leave them for later.
So I think, once upon a time, we used to look at the prospect, the customer, the sale as this kind of very clear, very simple, very defined set of terms that were plotted along a really linear timeline. And there were very, very few touch points. And clearly, with everything that we've talked about today, that has changed completely. So, you know, the burden for marketing is now to go beyond PR and comms. How do we redefine this landscape now, Mari?
Well, the landscape is, I quote my teenage daughters, loose, random, I would probably add chaotic, sick, epic, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
It's crazy out there. So defining is going to be really hard. So what I think you need to, you know, and what we need to do as marketers is try and make sense of it. Mm-hmm. Sense of it in terms of our customers, what their experience is today, what it should be, and what tools, technology we have to be able to impact that in a positive way. And we actually have a lot. We're very lucky today, as opposed to maybe Philip Kotler, who started the whole notion of the modern marketing 50, 60 years ago. We have come a long way. Now it's almost overwhelming. And the client that we thought was non-human, we thought that it would just work in a linear fashion, has turned into a multiple personality disorder person. Mm-hmm. So on one Monday he does this, Tuesday that, Wednesday something else. And if you look at yourselves, you do that. The way you buy a TV or a car or lipstick or, I don't know, a aftershave, your decision making is different. So now what we have is a random, loose client and a certain mindset's tools. The fundamentals haven't changed.
Yeah.
We just need to be smart about how we go about managing this environment to everybody's benefit and gain.
Sure. I think what's kind of interesting there is you talk about clients, because obviously because IBM's business is a B2B function, but you and I have talked outside about it's not being about B2B anymore, but B2I, so business to individual, because it's individuals who are at the end of our communications and end of our experiences, and they're the ones who make purchasing decisions. Out of curiosity, when do you guys think that a prospect becomes a customer?
I think this idea that a customer almost, you need to create awareness. That's part of, so the moment they're a prospect, they're a customer, are they not? Because part of your job is to create awareness. So understanding their world and how to connect with them and how to bring your brand to the fore when you need to engage that's how that works.
Yeah, and so if they're a customer from the very beginning, are they having branded experiences or customer experiences or branded customer experiences or all of the above?
Well, they're certainly having a myriad of complex experiences, and it's about understanding where you fit into that. So broadening the scope from here's what we want them to do and here's what we expect them to do, because we've got heaps of data that talks to that now. But actually, can we develop a level of richness around understanding their world?
Okay, how would you go around getting that understanding of richness? Because there's many different approaches to understanding customers. There's qual and quant, there's ethnographic research.
I think we're really good at the quant, we're really good at understanding the what, and putting that together and forming a picture. I think there's definitely more place for qual in terms of understanding the why. But also, I feel and have experienced, and I think you would have been doing this in your work recently too, is getting them in to help you ideate and to help you create those solutions and using their language and on their terms.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you can look at all the quantitative data, but actually when you hear from the actual customer, so, I mean, for our rebrand, we brought in students, alumni, the board, staff. A lot of the staff were students previously, and they're big industry players, like top directors and producers, etc. And just heard from them, and that really brought to life what the school was about and what the brand should be. Just, there's nothing like having that insight and just using as you say, using their language and hearing from them. And
did you observe in that some, particularly perhaps some of the senior people, having their assumptions challenged in terms of the way they'd been operating prior to that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, even sort of some, you know, I mean, the school has a lot of people who are working in industry, so it's not so much there, but some of the academics kind of question, you know, brand is a bit of an evil notion, and is it inauthentic, etc. And actually trying to get to it is that whole notion of it's what people say, hear and feel about you. It is everything. It's not a marketing thing that sits on the side. So as Liz said in the beginning, I mean, the strategy that I worked on with the CEO was really informed by the brand work as well. And so that really helped to get over that sort of brand as a necessary evil. And then the students are just amazing because they're all storytellers. It's a school for storytellers. Yeah. So they're just incredible, you know, and they just sort of basically wrote the copy for us, really. Because, you know, they just really positioned the school in a very interesting way. So, yeah.
Do you think they're expected to be part of this process?
No.
Okay.
And there was one of the master's students who actually, when we were working on the visual identity, was talking about how the old visual identity was very much daytime. And she had a really interesting way of explaining. She was saying it's very much daytime, but yet people watch things often in the dark. And so to bring sort of more nighttime to what we were doing. And it was just kind of an interesting, like a really different way of coming at it. And so she's really chuffed that we kind of like really took on what she was talking about. And a couple of others were like, you know, 18-year-old BA students and just talking about being at a university versus going to somewhere like Afters, which was, and for them, they felt that you could be more of an individual at the school at Afters, rather than a uni where they felt you had to conform more and kind of be a certain way and look a certain way and that kind of thing. So
yeah, because that was, I think we've talked previously, Kirsten was a client of mine, so I should probably disclose that. We talked previously about, you know, Afters appearing to be quite elitist, and actually once people got inside the school and experienced the product and experienced the customer as a customer themselves, that it was a place where they could become elite at what they do. It was a place where mastery could be developed rather than being elitist in terms of who got in.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think, you know, that's very, very interesting. And for customers today, I mean, what do customers want out of their customer experience with brands?
I don't think we truly know that.
Yeah.
I don't think we truly yet know exactly what clients want. And I think that's the one thing that we need to crack as marketers and professionals in this industry, is to say, what is it that, you know, what do I need to know? What are the fundamentals? It's no longer age, race and where you live. It's the multitude, and I come back to this idea of multiple personality. We're getting better at it. Apparently, if I have my mobile phone, you know more about me than I do myself. That's kind of cool. But what, as an organization, how do I then go about engaging and connecting with those customers? And I like what you said, Liz, about the B2C or business to individual, because I think in any industry, you probably need to take samples. You take personas, and personas go deep. What do I feel? What do I think? What do I see? And you use those personas to then link what you expect, what that persona's expected customer experience is, and then what we are delivering today. And I think marketers have a big role to play in organizations, regardless of industry, to drive that change. And that's, I think, our biggest opportunity and challenge, that looks at it long-term, short-term, partnership within the organization, with finance, sellers, procurement. We heard about procurement. Yeah. Because ultimately, that's, you know, the clients are the ones that keep the companies afloat.
I think there's a little bit of a risk. I think it's great that we've moved from kind of this sort of hard data into personas and that sort of richer view, but I think there is also a bit of a risk with personas too, that we are going from a very rigid box to just a bit of a bigger rigid box with a bit more richness. And so some of the work we've been doing recently is also around mindsets, so taking research and understanding the different mindsets that people go through when they experience a service. Because I think personas can keep us a little bit stuck sometimes. So having that richness in order to create the persona is great, but how do we also go beyond that to say, as you spoke about with your daughter, it's random, it's epic, it's all over the shop and we don't know what's going to happen. Yeah. So how can we potentially map that unpredictability into something that actually flows as opposed to boxing them up.
What we've done at IBM is actually look at a real customer. Now that's a novel thought. There's actually a real person, not a persona, not somebody's theory, but a real person, and mapped their touch points and try to gauge their experience. Now that's kind of cool, but how do you do that at scale? Because you can't map everybody's engagement unless you're probably a sales leader and you have a certain number of accounts or a certain number of clients that you work with. So then what becomes interesting is this idea of, okay, I know one person's journey, but where do I finesse? Where do I adjust? And as marketing, how much influence do I have if the legal team isn't approving a particular contract in our world? I have very little influence over it. So what am I promising that the experience is not delivering? And that's the channels. That keeps me awake at night to see how do I balance so that I marry the promise to the expectation, because that's when the customer continues to be a customer and becomes an advocate. And that's what you have. You want the trust and transparency, but you want the loyalty to go with it.
So I have a question, just for a second, to come back to segments. Because segmentation is also around need states, right? So it's not necessarily around individual customer, it's actually around the need state. And that's probably a unifying theory that we're seeing in a lot of kind of really big data-led businesses, whether they're Alibaba or Amazon, or our friends over at Netflix as well. We're looking at need states and how algorithms can play into that. My question is, how can brand then live as a layer around that and be communicated at each need state?
I think Nicole was just talking about that to some extent in the slide that she just put up with different. So that's about understanding where people are and what they're doing, what their need states are. But I think the need states need to also reflect people's, or get a good understanding of people's emotional states, because that can really shift the degree to which, when you're engaging, that's going to have an impact, that it is going to be engaging or it isn't.
Yeah.
And it's going to be useful as well. I mean, some of what she was talking about was just, don't make it too hard for people and just be incredibly useful, which is great for a brand that you're seen as being useful in their lives.
I think, Murray and I were talking yesterday actually around what happens, when we have a customer experience that is appalling, and it's appalling because the thing that we want to get done, that job that we want to get done, can't be done properly. So, for example, if our home internet breaks, we don't want to be on the phone with a call centre for 500 hours trying to find out when the damn internet's coming back. We'd love to have a text telling us that we know that your internet is down and that you're at home trying to use it, and don't worry, it's going to come back up and we're going to give you a mobile solution right now. Do you think there's a lot of opportunities for AI, obviously, to allow us to move from what is essentially hand-cranked and impossible to kind of respond in real time to moving to this kind of utopian state?
You look like you're going to answer it.
Sorry, it's a big question.
It's a huge question.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I mean, it feels like it's in some ways close to it, with the sort of like the home, what, I don't even know the names of them, but the Google Home, that it feels like it's kind of the next step that, you could have that happen. So how close it is, I don't know.
Yeah.
And kind of how humans work in with that as well. I mean, I think it's really interesting. We've been talking a lot about at the school about, AI and, like the whole notion of, robots will be able to do X, Y, Z, all the mundane jobs. 40% of jobs will be no longer in just a few years. And we've been talking about the need for creativity, and that is the World Economic Forum just said it's a number 3 skill that you need to be sustainable in your business and as a for the future. So we've been talking more about that, like how can you make sure you've got the human element. But in terms of that happening, I think it's probably not that far away. I hope so.
Yeah. Because I sort of see that like failing to get customer experience right is a little bit of an own goal. Right? Yeah. It doesn't take a lot to make people happy, but it does take a lot to understand what they need in the right time and place. Yeah. So, Beck, as a service and experience design specialist, what do you see as the biggest barriers to getting it right?
I think you and I had a chat about this slightly during the week. We've talked a bit about context and understanding their world, but also this connection between the brand and the organisation. And so culturally, we can put band-aids at the coalface between the customer and what we're doing, but ultimately if the organisation or the brand for that matter, it's not embedded in who they are and the way they work, then it's going to come unstuck. And so our job, I guess, is to, in terms of the work we do, is yes, let's understand those touch points along the journey, let's map those out, let's understand the service that that's part of, and then what system is that part of, and where does the organisation play into that? Because often culture, the organisational culture, which came out of the Hayne Royal Commission, it's like there's plenty of banks that have invested millions and millions of dollars in building customer experience teams and that kind of capability, but ultimately everyone's being rewarded in order to service the shareholder. So I think it's really important to make that connection between both understanding their world, which we've discussed is really hard, and also making sure that you start connecting that to the way you run the business, the way people are rewarded.
Can I add to that? I think it's the emotional connection. Because I come back to this idea that, we all still, I'd like to think we are all still human beings. And the AI is going to come, it's already here, so that's given. But how do you capitalize, how do you create that emotional connection and between the organizations and the person, the client, and what is that connective tissue? Is it through the physical experience? Is it through a brand experience? Is it what kind of experience do you want to create and how you make that happen? I actually think there's a lot to be said about not losing touch on the emotional side of decision making. In particular, a lot of the business is done without human interaction over the net, etc. I think that those are the brands that are going to win, and they are going to be the ones who will have that experience, that where the promise of marketing or brand is delivered through that experience, which then makes the prospect to a client and then into advocacy. And I think that's, if there is anything that, in my mind, that's maybe the secret sauce.
And I think for brands that starts with being curious and staying curious and a bit open, because I think traditionally we're rewarded for being experts and for coming up with great ideas, and that's actually how the business world works. We're employed because we know stuff, because we have experience. So how do we move perhaps along that spectrum to, okay, we do know things and that expertise is important, but how can we put that together with a more open mindset and being curious about people's worlds and lives and what they need, and how can we articulate those needs in such a way that has everyone who is part of the brand and around the brand and in the organisation understanding that that's actually core to how we have an impact or how we become successful.
We heard Lyndall speak earlier about L'Oreal and about creating, deep, rich point-of-sale experiences that allow you to trial product and hopefully stop product being stolen, testers off the shelf. Customer experience in retail, we know, has changed tremendously, and we're seeing the uptick of brands, while they're doing most of their selling in the digital domain, are actually maintaining bricks and mortar stores because they're using them as interaction points where the value of the human experience is really important. So you're having, sales assistants who have deep product knowledge, who have high levels of emotional intelligence, and we're seeing, future of beauty, which is I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with the brand, but it asks for customer data and they create personalised products. So there's something like 56 million product variations. Now you can never trial the product because it's made specifically for you, and they do all of their selling online. But even for them, as a real kind of agitator to the skincare category, they had to open up a bricks and mortar store because people want to make connections. Where do you think the big opportunities are as we move into this kind of technologically driven space beyond that making of a face-to-face human connection? Where do you think the other big opportunities might be?
You got us all thinking.
Yeah. It's a curveball. I think it is a curveball. I mean, I think that there is a need for a little bit of rigour to go back to the priorities of the business and think about how the business priorities stack up against what we know about our customers and build experiential frameworks that help us to deliver against those objectives. And I think that for marketeers, it means stepping out of our comfort zone, of our colouring in zone, and making content and making creative, and actually being a little bit more ruthlessly commercial, and going back to the business to understand what it really needs.
I think you're right, Liz. I would also say it's going back to the basics. Because if we look at it in terms of that client that we now know is that individual, and what is that we have to offer, and what is that we want to offer and give to that client, and continuing measuring it. I actually don't think it's anything revolutionary. I think it's actually going back to the basics, because like I said, we are almost overwhelmed with the technology, with the data, and with the sophistication in some ways. So it's almost like a kid in a lolly shop. You don't know which one to take. If you go back to the fundamentals, I think that's where the opportunity is. The other opportunity is, and I don't know how many of you work in large organizations, but the opportunity is breaking down the silos. I don't know which of you work in organizations when you have one client database. I know organizations that have the client is split into the multiple personalities. One is the sales database, one is operational, one is finance, and then there's the marketing database. So being able to have that one single view and understanding of the customer overall, and then being able to break the silos. How does the finance guys view the customer versus operations versus sales versus marketing? And creating almost like this non-siloed world, a wonderful place to be in, where we truly have a single goal in mind. And we have a plan. It may not be revolutionary, but we're going to do 3 things right. And we're going to absolutely monitor progress. If we're off track, what are we going to do? I think that's where the opportunity is. It took me a while to think about it, but it is back to basics, I think.
So Kirsten, you've just gone through this process of going back to basics.
Yeah, going back to why the school was, established in 1973, which was really interesting because it was a cultural intervention by the government saying there are no Australian stories on any of our screens.
Wow. And
so the school has this cultural remit as well as a commercial one and an industrial one to make sure the Australian industry thrives. But it's a really interesting time to be doing it because obviously, I've got my phone, I couldn't let go of it. But, everyone has a screen. So, the school could have been this sort of niche thing. You were saying, what is TV now? Well, it's screens. It's like people are consuming so much content. So, we went back to the basics, but then had this contemporary view of there's so much opportunity for us and for our students to be creating really interesting content. And how do you get noticed when programs are served via algorithms as opposed to people really reviewing critiques anymore, and how do you get that cut through? And so we went back to the basics and just really honed it down to the sort of school for storytellers really is at the heart of what we're doing. And then you're working with all this technology, but it is that's what we're doing. You've got to tell a good story. And when we have our applicants for our courses, it's very much about, we don't want it to be you've got your hands on the best equipment to create this really schmick looking thing. It's actually what point of view do you have and what's an interesting story you've got. And that's all linked in with our need for just really having a diverse cohort. We're national, we've only got a Sydney campus. How do we get people to come in from across the country? How do we get people who in the past have thought I have not heard of that place, or it's not for me because it's too... It is too much the Ivory Tower.
Oscar winners.
Oscar winners. So so we still use the names of the Oscar winners because it is and Tony McNamara was just nominated for an Academy Award, and he went to the school screenwriter of The Favourite. So there's and then there's lots of students who have created new businesses. So there's a lot of entrepreneurial sort of action. So it's how do we balance the sort of work that's happening now, just from really recent grads to the Oscar winners.
I'm curious about how the insight around the student experience and what's happening in industry and the demands from government come together to kind of help you innovate product and innovate the experiences that live around that product. Are you at that stage now where you're doing that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we're funded out of the communication and the arts. And so that means that, as I said, we have this sort of cultural remit. We have a cultural remit, but it gives us opportunity to actually be talking to other areas like the Department of Innovation and also education. And also it just, so that gives us all these other opportunities to bring that together. So you've got the cultural and you've got the innovation, you've got the education. It's meant that we've got an innovation lab, so we're working on, we've got biometrics running at the moment, which is really interesting, and we've worked with some producers who can take content and actually have people, and a lot of you are probably aware of biometrics. It's like the old lie detector and the sort of where your eyes go and all of that, and actually then looking at that against classic exit surveys, and it's often really quite different that you say what you think you should say in the exit survey versus what's happening in biometrics. And then really just our course development or product development has really sort of been informed by the brand and by this whole like burgeoning need by people to watch things on screens, like the whole 80% of online content this year is going to be screen content. So that's actually really helped us in terms of, I think, going to a film school beforehand was seen as very, like, it still is, if you want to be a feature film director, it's still a really difficult profession. Like, you've really got to stick at it. But now with the bachelor program we've got, it's about being just a great content producer, so that broadens our market as well, So that answered your question.
It has, and 3 others, which was fantastic. Thank you. I know we've got a fairly diverse audience here today, and there are folks who come. Can you stick your hand up if you come from a brand? Okay. What about if you're media? Agency? Oh, only a couple of
a few agencies.
Yeah, they've all gone to the pub already. I say that as an ex-agency person. So I love when these panels can be really functional. So when people can walk away and go, right, that's a great bit of insight. I can take that and apply that in my organisation. If we're going to close out on some top tips for folks who are in here about what they can do as marketeers to add value to the customer experience piece and around making sure that there's unification around brand and CX, what would you think those top 3 tips would be, or top 2?
For me, it would be to start with an experiment and see if you can get a bunch of different people across those silos to be part of that. If you're in a large organisation, if you're already in a small, agile organisation, then perhaps the message is challenge your assumptions, get those assumptions out and start challenging them. What are we doing just out of habit, or what are we doing because we think this is how it's going to be? But certainly in a larger organisation, how can you create an experiment that does have the customer at the heart of it, that changes the way that you solve your problem, the way that you get it to market, and the way that you learn from it, and then be able to tell that story and be able to measure it, because that's what the business is listening to. And the measurement isn't always a sales uplift. It could be de-risking something. So how can you start that way and then scale and find some, some friendlies, really.
friendlies.
To be part of that. To be part of that and then
fun.
To scale. Yeah.
Murray?
Yeah, I guess similar thoughts. I think anybody, regardless of whether you're in an agency or you're in brand or you're, media, I think we all own that responsibility as professionals to start from the client and understanding that client. And I like your idea of, start small. Sometimes transformation happens on a daily basis rather than being a 3-year transformation project. But take that personal ownership and go, I'm going to go and talk to somebody. I'm going to find a client. I'm going to understand their journey. What do they see in the media? What do they experience? And then go, wow, is that what we want it to be? And when we work very well, and people make decisions based on facts, but also emotions. So then find friends in the organization, create little huddles, little project teams, whatever you want to call it, scrums, and come together and start thinking about, is there a better way? And I think, that's the art and the science of it. Agree a plan and then monitor daily again, to me, it's not what happens now and then happens next year. That was the wonderful world we used to live in. Now you optimize every time, needs to become almost your DNA. But I think the first is the growth mindset. Stay curious, start asking questions. Don't be comfortable with what you see today, because your competition is already doing it most likely. And I think, this room can absolutely make a difference. So, that's my message to everybody.
Kirsten?
That's a big message.
Good message.
I think it's also the culture of the organisation. So if you're working for a brand, and for afters it is incredibly important, because the teachers are in the industry, they go off into the,
Yep.
so the brand and the customer experience, so it's actually that the organisation itself is living that brand, and so therefore when they're dealing with customers, because they all deal with customers,
Yeah.
and we've got students as customers, we've got government, we've got alumni, we've got the industry, and so it's incredibly important that that you can somehow, and it is finding friendlies, and it was really helpful at Afters because the CEO really got it, and it was sort of, we've done a lot of work on the organisation living the values and actually really bringing it to life, and people have brought it to life in really interesting ways. So it has to start, I think, from the inside out as well.
So experimentation, giving things a go, and culture.
Yeah.
I think there's some pretty great tips. Does anyone have any questions before we close off for today? I think that's a wrap. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.